Before Sterling and Logan County could become a major producer of sugar beets, land had to be settled, railroads needed to be built, and a town needed to be created. In 1859, the Colorado Gold Rush would begin. This brought many people from the east to the area soon to be known as Colorado. During the 1849 California Gold Rush, most people just passed over the Logan County area. Now many people would follow the South Platte River to get to Denver. There were stage stations called Fort Wickett near Marino and Valley Station near Sterling. This will help people start to get familiar with the area. John Ilf Wesley was a part of the Colorado Gold Rush. Instead of getting involved in mining, he would open up a retail store in Denver. This will help him get the money to buy cattle. Ilf will create the largest ranch in Colorado history. It was mainly located in northeast Colorado. Others would follow in his footsteps. W.S. Hadfield came to the Sterling area in 1871. There were Greeley ranchers camping along the river, but Hadfield will be the first permanent settler. He also came from the Union colony in Greeley and would drive oxen from there and would eventually raise sheep. Hadfield homesteaded near Pawnee Creek, 3 miles south of where Sterling would eventually be. Some settlers came after and got scared of the Indians. He would convince them to stay. Then, in 1870, he moved to Cedar Creek, north of the coming town, because it had better land for ranching. Eventually, Hadfield would live a more retired life in Sterling and become a stockholder in the Logan County Bank. After the American Civil War, many Southerners were looking for a fresh start. Families from Tennessee and Mississippi would end up settling in the area. R.C. Perkins, R.E. Smith, J.H. Pruitt, and M.S. Smith arrived at the Union colony in Greeley in 1873. The best land was already taken in that region, so they set out for the Platte Valley. They decided to homestead 6 miles north of the soon-to-be city. The families built sod homes, and the area would eventually be known as Old Sterling. Lumber, livestock, and firewood was freighted in from Greeley. In 1880, news came that the Union Pacific was going to build a railroad from Julesburg to LaSalle. M.C. King, one of the southern settlers, went to Sydney and then took the train to Omaha. He offered to donate 80 acres of land to the Union Pacific to guarantee the railroad would go by his homestead. They would accept his offer. King plotted a town in September 1881. Many people would move from Old Sterling to this new city. The Burlington Railroad would also go through the new town. This would allow cattle and farm products like sugar beets to be shipped out to the new markets across the United States. It would also make it easier to ship products in and for people to settle in the area. An application for the town's incorporation was given to the judge in Greeley in 1884. Sterling was now officially a town. Logan County will be formed in 1887. To grow sugar beets, Logan County farmers must have access to water. While the semi-arid environment of Colorado does not get enough rain for farming, the state was able to figure out the ancient tradition of irrigation. Logan County and Sterling utilize the South Platte River to produce the sugar beets for their factory. This river, which starts in the Rocky Mountains, flows through Denver, Greeley, Fort Morgan, Sterling, and Julesburg. Along this route, canals and reservoirs would be built to support agricultural production in Colorado. The first official ditch built in Logan County was the Sterling No. 1 ditch. It was built on the Godfrey Ranch. Holland Godfrey came to the area in 1861. Many people heading to the mountains for the gold rush would follow the South Platte River to get there. He would set up a station and a general supply depot to support these travelers. In 1872, a group of men would come together to build a ditch on this ranch. They would start the Fort Wickett Ditch Company, which would later be renamed the South Platte Ditch Company. Chambers, a homesteader on this land and one of the men who helped build the ditch, would plant some crops to test it out. At times, it was hard to get the labor to complete the ditch. For example, when word came that the Union Pacific was going to connect to Denver via Cheyenne, many of the workers left. After this initial ditch, many more irrigation projects would be built. Around the same time as Sterling No. 1 ditch, Schneider and the Buffalo ditches were built. These first ditches were only built in bottomlands where it was easier to get water to them. As the population grew and confidence in ditch building increased, higher lands were taken on. In between 1875 and 1886, the Springsdales, Davis Brothers, Smith, Lowline, Iliff, and Sterling No. 2 ditches were built. The coming of the railroad in 1881 is a big reason why there was such an increase in the number of ditches. More people would be willing to invest in irrigating land where the crops could be shipped out to the market. The last push for ditches came in 1890 with the building of Harmony, Bravo, Palo, and Dillon ditches. These projects will be the initial foundation of irrigation in Logan County. After settlers and a railroad came to Logan County, development could really start to take off. R.C. Perkins, a local businessman, formed a committee in 1890 to travel to Grand Island, Nebraska to investigate the sugar beet factory there and see if this is something that could be done in Sterling. He had the support and financial backing of Logan County commissioners and businessmen. Even though it was a while until Sterling got a factory, it got the community thinking about the possibility. Sugar beets were still being grown in Logan County without a factory. The railroad was utilized to send beets to Grand Island, Nebraska, and then later to Eaton, Colorado. Logan County residents did not give up hope on their own factory, though. Attempts were made to get contracts for construction, but nothing clicked. Then, Charles Betcher came to Sterling to help out. He got contracts signed with Kibley Manufacturing Company from Ohio on behalf of Sterling. Machinery for the factory was shipped in from an abandoned sugar factory in Saginaw, Michigan. Construction began in April 1905. Since the location of the factory was close to the South Platte, water had to be pumped out of the ground to keep the excavation intact. By November 7, 1905, the factory was ready. The original sugar beet celebration happened around the time it was completed. People got together to mark this important event, and many people involved in the project made speeches. The real reason for Betcher coming to help was revealed on January 1, 1906. The Sterling Sugar Company was acquired by the Great Western Sugar Company. Nevertheless, this factory would be a major boom for Sterling and Logan County. First off, obviously the demand for sugar beets would increase, and this would help out the farmers of the area. Great Western Sugar Company would sign many contracts with farmers in the area. Second, beet pulp, which is left over after the sugar has been extracted, would be a cheap feed for cattle. Ranching was an important industry in Logan County area even before farming. Instead of shipping in corn from Kansas, Nebraska, and Iowa, ranchers now have access to more cost-effective feed. Lastly, the factory would hire many people to work on the industrial side and in the offices. This would draw many people to Sterling. All of these industries were bringing more money to the area and then create even more jobs outside of these sectors. The population would increase by 200% 5 years after the factory was built. Sterling was a regional leader and a growing place. Brush, Fort Morgan, and Ovid would follow Sterling in building a sugar beet factory. All these cities are located along the South Platte River. Many thought that irrigation had hit its peak in the late 1890s, but then the Colorado state government passed the Irrigation District Law of 1905. This would allow farmers to come together to form districts that could invest in larger irrigation projects. This would be perfect timing for Sterling because after the factory was built, demand for water would increase. North Sterling and Pruitt Reservoir would store water from the South Platte to provide the water supply necessary for the sugar beet industry to take off in Logan County and Sterling. Colorado has good farming soil, but it lacks the rainfall to grow plants. These reservoirs fill up the ditches to allow this land to blossom. The North Sterling Reservoir is located about 14 miles above town. In 1905, a survey was done for this reservoir, and in the same year, a filing was made for the water rights to supply this project. This would lead to the Sterling Promotion and Irrigation Company to be organized. The company would then encourage the North Sterling Irrigation District to be developed in 1907. Landowners within the proposed district voted whether or not to create the organization, and they decided to do so. The new district would then agree to buy all the rights and property of the Sterling Promotion and Irrigation Company. This would lead to the contract with Empire Construction Company worth around $1,835,000 to construct the reservoir and canals. Work on the dam started in 1909 and was completed in 1910. They would use horses, pull elevators, wagons, and tractors to build the project. The horses would pasture on Cedar Creek, and they did not have to be tied up at the end of the day because they were so tired. Once completed, this water supply would allow corn, beans, alfalfa, small grains, and of course, sugar beets to be grown in abundance. This would increase the value of Logan County land supplied by this project. North Sterling Reservoir would also be a place that fascinated local residents and provided a space for recreation. For example, people would have picnics and go fishing there. In 1992, a state park was established. The second major reservoir of the area would be Pruitt Reservoir. Located south of Marino, this project would also increase the value of the land and grow many sugar beets that would be sent to the Sterling factory. Great Western Sugar Company saw this budding area and thought it would be a great place to grow sugar beets. While the ditches were a great start, the area needed a reservoir to supply the water needs of sugar beets. Great Western had engineers make a report on the potential project. This would lead to a petition to create the Logan Irrigation District, which was published in the Republican Advocate newspaper. This document was then presented to the county commissioners of Logan County. Landowners within the proposed district voted in favor of its creation, and in 1910, the Logan Irrigation District was created. It is now time to figure out how to fund this project and start building it. As laid out by the irrigation law, districts would utilize bonds to finance the project. A resolution was created to take out $480,000. A contract was then created that included the Pruitt Reservoir and Land Company, Logan Irrigation District, and the Denver National Bank. The district would use this funding to pay the Great Western Sugar Company to organize labor, material, and appliances. The Logan County newspaper, the Republican Advocate, stated on July 25, 1911, "Few Sterlingites have visited the work and realized the immensity and importance to this community. Not only is its construction putting thousands of dollars in circulation for labor and supplies, but will add thousands of dollars to the value of the land under it and mean additional thousands in increased crops." Pruitt Reservoir would be completed in 1912 and would provide the water that the sugar beet farmers and the Great Western Sugar Company needed. With a growing population, 2 railroads, a factory, an expanding city, and irrigation, Sterling and Logan County was set up to become a thriving sugar beet region.
My name is Kay Gaynor Dreyer. I was raised on a farm southwest of Atwood. My father and mother were sugar beet growers, as well as raising corn and alfalfa and pinto beans. My father was a top 10 sugar beet grower many years in a row. Thankfully, he had a good relationship with the Production Credit Bank in Sterling, and Ed Tunison was head of the bank at that time, and he made it possible for my father to buy a farm when a good farm came up for sale. He knew my father was a really good farmer, and he would be able to make payments back to the bank. That's how it all started. I loved my time at sugar beet harvest. I couldn't wait to get home from school and go to the fields and ride the last load to the beet dump at Atwood. My mother weighed trucks for several years, plus she worked in the fields and drove trucks with a load of beets to the beet dump. It was a great experience for me as a child. My father was Wayne Gaynor, and my mother was Marjorie Gaynor. She helped in the fields, cooked meals, drove trucks to and from the beet dump, and ran the scale house for a few years. My father told me if you were paying for your farm, you raised sugar beets, as they were a good cash crop. I remember Mr. Garner from Great Western Sugar Company, as he came with other field men out to our farm to check on the crop and see how it was coming along. Men for Production Credit Association were also a great help. My father farmed and ranched for Tom Probst as a boy, and then for Alex Phoebe as a farmhand. He married my mother Marjorie in 1939. After marriage, he rented land from Will Logan, south of Atwood, and started raising sugar beets there. Later, he bought the Joe Cattlecheck farm thanks to help from the Production Credit Association. Our neighbors were the Akamassos, who are still farming there, and Datteries. Unrines and the Maury family were neighbors as well. They were all very good farmers. I remember how I looked forward to beet harvest. I did not want to go to school on those days, but had to attend. I couldn't wait to get home from school, change my clothes, run out to the field. I had my own trusty beet knife. It was a machete with a hook on the end of it. And at 8, 9 years old, we knew how to top a beet. It was just, You hold the beet by the small end and chop the green leaves off the top, and then throw it in the windrow. In those days, we had a John Deere tractor with a digger and a topper. The digger dug the beets from the earth, and the topper had spinning discs, and it would cut the tops off. Then it went up a beet chain, into this big box. And from that box, there was another chain that dumped it into a windrow. And then you had another tractor that had the loader. At that time, they were separate pieces of equipment. The loader would come along, pick up the beets in the windrow, carry it up a chain that dumped into your truck. And then you could take it to the beet dump. Going to the beet dump was quite an experience in itself. I had to go. I didn't want to miss out on anything. So the last load, I always got to ride to the beet dump at Atwood. First you drove on the scale so they could weigh you, and then you drove up on the platform. And a man helped, and then my father, and they would unloose the chains on the sideboards of the truck, and it would fall, and then on the other side was this machine that lifted the bed of the truck up. And I thought sure the truck was going to tip over and I would be killed. But anyway, the beets fell out into this belt area, and then when it was empty, you put the sideboard back up and you drove off the platform, and you stopped under another little chute that deposited it was called the tear, and it was the weeds and the leaves and the dirt off of the beets, and so you took that back home with you. But in the meantime, you had to drive back over the scale. They weighed you again, so they had a correct number on how much the beets weighed. Then when you went home, it was my job to take the trusty scoop shovel and scoop the tear off of the truck into the field so it was ready for a new load of beets. Sugar beets were very important to Logan County when I was growing up. I remember even our Bible school, a little community Atwood church that didn't have any money, so we just made do with what we could. So everybody brought a sugar beet to the classes, and we carved Aunt Jemima statues out of sugar beets. The little pointed end, we made it round, we made her head, and we gave her arms. I can't remember how we made her arms, but we made little clothes for her. And then the big part of the sugar beet, we made a skirt that went around her. And that was our Aunt Jemima sugar beets. I remember the braceros that Great Western Sugar Company contracted to come and thin beets for us. Most of them were young Mexican men from Mexico and couldn't speak English. They could speak a little bit of English, but I remember one time my father was trying to get something through to one of the men, and they were both frustrated because they couldn't understand each other, and the young Mexican man took a finger to his head like this and went boom, and just fell on the ground, and everybody was laughing. It was a funny moment, but it was trying times because of the language barrier. Great Western contracted for these men to come, and they usually spent about a month with us and thinned our beets, and then they would go to another family and do the same thing in their beet fields. There were no beet thinners at that time, and so that's what the braceros did. They had little short hose, and it was back-breaking work. The beets were planted too thick, and so the men would come along and chop out every so often to thin the beets out, so the ones that survived would have room to grow. My mother always made sure that their house was clean, the stove worked, their bedding was clean. We had lots of experiences. They taught us kids how to count in Spanish, and a few cuss words that we didn't know what they meant, but we thought it was great that we were learning Spanish. One young man had an appendicitis attack, and I can't imagine what he went through being in a foreign country and not being able to speak the language and being operated on in the Sterling Hospital. It had to have been horrible for him, but he survived, and we got him back home to Mexico. One young man bought a sewing machine for his mother. He wanted to ship it back to Mexico. And my mother was a fine seamstress. When they got the sewing machine home, it didn't work. My mother tried everything she could to get it to work. So she took the young man and the sewing machine, went back to town, and got his money back. My parents treated them really well, but I know there were a lot of places that they weren't treated well. I remember my father taking a cream can of water to one of the places out into the field for the workers because the owners of the farm did not even supply them with water in the field. Some were treated very bad, but my parents really treated their help well. And then they, after that time was up, then they went back. Great Western did that for several years.